Hey guys, tonight we drift into something both ancient and, honestly, kind of dull in the best way possible, Norse mythology. But don't expect fiery battles or thundering storms right now. Instead, imagine yourself floating slowly across a misty sea, the kind where nothing really happens except the occasional seagull squawking in the distance. The waves roll gently, no drama, no sudden shipwrecks. Just you, bobbing along, eyes already starting to feel a little heavier. And here's the funny thing. You probably won't survive this. Not because of a dragon or a frost giant, but because you'll fall asleep halfway through. That's kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave me a comment telling me your location and your local time. I always love knowing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping into a quiet shore, somewhere on the edge of Midgard, the world of humans. The sand isn't golden or dramatic, it's gray and a little damp. The kind of sand that sticks to your boots instead of flowing elegantly between your toes. Seabirds wheel lazily overhead, but even they seem bored, their cries sounding half-hearted. Somewhere in the distance lies Asgard, the home of the gods, but tonight it isn't glowing or majestic, it's just faint outlines in the twilight, like a city that forgot to turn on its lights. You wander slowly. No rush, no danger, only the hum of your own breathing and the steady crunch of gravel underfoot. The sagas might tell you of warriors and thunder, but you're not in that version of the tale. You've stumbled into the quieter draft, the Norse myths where nothing much happens. Where gods misplace things, cows lick ice blocks for years, and builders spend centuries stacking one rock at a time. A thin breeze brushes past you, carrying the smell of salt and wet wood. Somewhere out at sea, a lonely ship is anchored, but it isn't sailing anywhere. The sailors are probably napping, hammocks swaying back and forth. The whole world feels like it's slowing down just for you, inviting you to sink deeper into the calm. It's almost funny. When you think about Norse mythology, you expect battles with frost giants or serpents so huge they circle the earth. Yet here, what you really notice is how much waiting and wandering fills the gaps. Scholars still argue whether these quieter tales were ever meant to be told at the fire, or if they were just filler between the grander sagas. Maybe someone centuries ago was just like me, trying to bore their audience gently into sleep. As you wander inland, the ground grows softer, marshy in places, but not enough to cause trouble. It just slows you down a little. A frog hops lazily into a puddle, making ripples that take forever to fade. You stand there watching, because honestly, what else are you going to do? That's the pace of tonight's story. Slow, soft, deliberately uneventful. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel the rhythm syncing with your own breath. Step by step, breath by breath, you're being drawn further into this boring, beautiful Norse world. You almost expect something dramatic to happen, but it never does, and that's exactly why you feel safer, more relaxed, more ready to let go. The shore fades behind you. Ahead, the faint outline of a forest. Not a dangerous one, not dark and scary, just rows of tall, thin pines swaying in the gentlest way, whispering like tired old storytellers who have told the same tale too many times. You walk into their shadows, letting the quiet wrap around you like a blanket. Somewhere, you think you hear the distant creak of a longhouse door. Maybe there's a fire inside, maybe just a pot of stew simmering endlessly, never boiling over. But you don't rush toward it. You take your time. Because tonight, there is no hurry. No clash of swords, no thunder, no urgency. Just you, the gods, forgotten leftovers, and the promise of a story that drifts as slowly as a feather falling through still air. And so it begins. You wander further into the forest, and it's here you first notice him. Not in a burst of fire or a swirl of mischief, but just, tripping. That's Loki for you. Not the grand schemer of the movies, not the dark trickster plotting chaos, but a god who cannot seem to keep his own 2 feet steady. He's moving along a worn dirt path, mumbling to himself about something utterly unimportant, and then, snap, his foot catches on a root. He stumbles forward, arms flailing like he's trying to grab invisible branches. He catches himself, sort of, but not without muttering curses under his breath. You might expect flames, illusions, some clever trick to cover his embarrassment. Instead, he just sighs, dusts off his knees, and keeps walking. You follow him at a safe distance. He doesn't notice you, or maybe he does but doesn't care. His trip is slow, unhurried, full of small pauses as if every pebble deserves his attention. And every so often, thud, there he goes again, tripping over nothing in particular. It's oddly comforting, watching a god so thoroughly fail at being graceful. A squirrel darts across the path, pauses to stare at Loki, and even it looks unimpressed. Loki bends down, pretending he dropped something important, but you can tell he's just covering for the fact that he nearly face-planted again. Scholars still argue whether Loki's clumsiness was ever recorded in the original sagas, or whether it's just something storytellers added later to soften his edge. But in this sleepy version, it feels perfectly natural. The path stretches on and on, leading nowhere in particular. Trees creak softly in the wind, shedding little flakes of bark that drift to the ground like slow snow. Loki kicks one, mutters again, then kicks another. He seems annoyed at the world, but too tired to do anything about it. You can almost hear his inner monologue. God of mischief, tripped by moss again. There's a kind of strange dignity in his lack of dignity. He's not plotting to overthrow Odin, not weaving complex lies, just sulking at his own lack of coordination. A raven flaps down onto a branch overhead, watches for a moment, then flies off as if saying, not worth it. Even Hugin and Munin, Odin's famous ravens, have better things to do tonight. You keep walking behind him, listening to the crunch of leaves, the occasional stumble, the low muttering. Nothing urgent happens. No great revelation. Just Loki, the supposedly cleverest of gods, reduced to the level of any tired traveler on a long, boring path. And in a way, it makes him more human than ever. He feels less like a myth, more like that one friend who swears they can dance but then knocks over the lamp. You know the type. A patch of mushrooms glows faintly at the edge of the trail. Loki notices, pauses, then squats down to poke them with a stick. He seems fascinated for all of 3 seconds before losing balance again, toppling sideways into the moss. You can't help but smile, or maybe stifle a yawn, because honestly, the whole scene is more slow-motion comedy than epic legend. The forest doesn't care. The wind sighs through the branches, owls blink from hidden perches, and the moss cradles Loki's fall like it's been expecting him all along. He groans, sits up, picks twigs from his hair, and mutters something about how nobody respects him. Which might be true, but right now, it's mostly because he can't walk 10 steps without creating his own slapstick routine. You follow him deeper into the woods until the trail fades into soft earth. His stumbles become slower, less frequent, as though even gravity has grown bored. He yawns, stretches, and finally just sits down on a log. Not a dramatic throne, not a sinister lair, just a damp log in the middle of nowhere. He stares into the trees, and for once, does absolutely nothing. And that's the quiet magic of this moment. The god of tricks, schemes, and chaos reduced to stillness. A clumsy wanderer who can't outwit the roots of the earth, left with no choice but to pause, sulk, and maybe rest. You feel yourself pausing too. Breathing slower. Settling into the silence between his sighs. The forest around you feels like it could last forever, unchanging, uneventful. And you realize, that's exactly what you needed. You leave Loki behind, still sulking on his log, and wander toward a clearing where a figure much larger stomps around in frustration. Thor, god of thunder, protector of mankind, mighty wielder of the hammer Mjolnir, except tonight, he's not wielding it. Because once again, he's misplaced it. It's not stolen this time, not hidden by giants, not part of some epic tale. He's simply lost track of it like you'd misplace your keys or the remote control. You watch him dig through patches of grass, grumbling under his breath, kicking aside pebbles. His red beard bristles with irritation, but not enough to summon lightning. He just looks like a man who really wishes he remembered where he set something down. He checks behind a rock, shakes his head. He peers under a bush, muttering something about dwarfs playing tricks. He even squints up at the sky like maybe he absent-mindedly tossed it into a tree and forgot. His goats, Tan Grisnir and Tanningyoster, munch lazily nearby, utterly unbothered by his struggle. One of them coughs softly, as if mocking him. And this is the great Thor, reduced to the everyday routine of, where did I put that thing? Scholars still argue whether the myths about Thor losing his hammer were exaggerated metaphors for vulnerability or just comic relief told to entertain tired audiences after long workdays. But here, you see the version that feels more honest. A strong man tearing apart his own yard because he's sure the hammer has to be somewhere nearby. You trail him as he circles the clearing again, eyes narrowed, heavy boots stomping down moss. He picks up a branch, shakes it like it might miraculously transform back into Mjolnir. It doesn't. He sighs, throws the branch aside, scratches his beard, and stares blankly into space for a moment before trying again. At one point, he even asks the goats if they've seen it. They look at him, chew slower, then look away. Not much help there. You can almost imagine him posting a sign, "Lost hammer." Short, stocky, responds to the name Mjolnir. A raven lands nearby, maybe one of Odin's pair, and Thor actually asks it too. The bird cocks its head, blinks, and flies off. No divine intervention tonight. Just Thor versus his own forgetfulness. The hours stretch on. He checks the same places twice, then 3 times. Behind rocks, under logs, inside hollows. Each time, he looks more annoyed at himself. He mumbles something about Loki, then shakes his head because no, even Loki wouldn't waste his time hiding it in this dull patch of forest. Eventually, he plops down on the grass, beard damp with sweat, and just stares at the ground. You'd expect thunder to rumble, the skies to darken with his anger, but the only sound is a nearby brook trickling calmly along. It almost feels like nature itself is mocking him with its serenity. And that's when you spot it, tucked right there behind his own seat. Mjolnir, resting quietly as if it had been there the whole time. You don't say anything. Thor shifts, glances down, and freezes. There's this long silence, like he's trying to decide whether to admit he overlooked it or pretend it magically appeared. Finally, he lets out a booming laugh that sounds more embarrassed than triumphant. He lifts the hammer, tests its weight, nods to himself, and mutters, "Of course, exactly where I meant it to be." "Sure, Thor, whatever you say." The goats don't react. The forest doesn't care. The brook keeps flowing, owls blink, and you find yourself stifling a yawn. Somehow, the mightiest weapon in Norse mythology, reclaimed after such an undramatic search, feels like the ultimate bedtime story detail. You keep walking, leaving Thor to polish his hammer and mumble excuses to himself. The sound of the brook fades into the distance, replaced by the slow rhythm of your own footsteps. The gods may be larger than life, but tonight, they're just as forgetful, clumsy, and ordinary as anyone else. And that realization makes the world feel a little smaller, a little safer, and a lot sleepier. You drift onward, leaving Thor muttering to himself about how he definitely meant to leave his hammer exactly where it was. The trees thin out, and the scent of smoke drifts on the breeze. Not the sharp bite of a battle fire, but the softer, homey smell of something cooking. Your steps lead you to a longhouse where the gods are gathering for their morning meal. You'd expect feasts of roasted boar and overflowing horns of mead, but instead, what greets you is breakfast. And not even a particularly exciting breakfast. Inside the hall, a long wooden table stretches across the room. The benches are worn, groaning slightly under the weight of the gods as they shuffle in, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Odin sits at the head, but even he looks more like a tired grandfather than a ruler of realms. His single eye droops slightly, and he pokes half-heartedly at a bowl of porridge as though wisdom itself could be stirred up with a wooden spoon. Beside him, Frigg pours herself a cup of watered-down ale. Not the legendary mead of poetry, not some glowing nectar of immortality, just ale so weak it's practically flavored water. Across the table, Balder yawns, stretching like a cat, before tearing into a crust of bread so stale it could double as a weapon. You slip onto a bench unnoticed, watching the slow ritual unfold. A servant shuffles forward with a tray of smoked fish, laying it down with all the enthusiasm of someone who's been doing the same thing for centuries. The gods take their portions without fuss, chewing slowly, barely speaking. For once, there's no clash of egos, no arguments over honor or destiny. Just the quiet sound of chewing and the occasional cough. Thor arrives late, hair mussed, still looking sheepish from his hammer mishap. He grabs a hunk of bread, dips it into his porridge, and eats with the focus of someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Loki, who has apparently recovered from his forest-tripping adventure, slides in across from him, grinning faintly. He looks like he's this close to making a joke about lost hammers, but even he seems too tired to bother. The room hums with a dull comfort. A dog dozes by the hearth, tail twitching now and then. Someone sneezes, someone else sighs, and Odin mumbles something about how men will never stop fighting over land and honor. But no one listens. Everyone's too busy buttering bread with the back of their knives. It strikes you how ordinary it all feels. These are gods who shape worlds, summon storms, and guard against giants, and yet, here they are, dealing with lukewarm porridge that sticks to the roof of the mouth. Scholars still argue whether myths ever meant to capture these unremarkable daily rituals, or if such details were smoothed over to make the gods seem larger than life. But if they did have mornings like this, you can imagine just how many centuries of fish and bread they endured. The air is heavy with the smell of smoke, salt, and slightly sour dairy. A jug of milk is passed around, sloshing faintly. It tastes fine. Nothing to sing about, nothing to complain about. Just milk. Even Loki, restless as ever, ends up resting his chin in his palm, tracing circles on the table with a finger as though the boredom is contagious. Freyr stares at his reflection in a cup of ale, while Tyr absent-mindedly sharpens a knife he probably won't use for hours. Time drags, slow as the dripping of sap from the beams overhead. You glance toward the hearth and notice the cook stirring yet another pot. It's stew this time, for later in the day, bubbling with vegetables and bits of goat meat. The smell is comforting but not mouthwatering, just steady, reliable food for immortals who still, strangely enough, need to eat like anyone else. One of the goats outside bleats, and everyone pauses for a moment, listening. Nothing happens. They go back to chewing. That's breakfast in Asgard. Gods silently sharing food, no grand speeches, no cosmic revelations. Just the dull, grounding rhythm of mealtime. And you realize, it's oddly soothing. The world feels steadier when even the gods have mornings that are a little boring. You let yourself breathe slower, leaning into the hum of chewing, the clink of wooden cups, the crackle of fire. If this is what eternity feels like, meals without drama, mornings without chaos, you can understand why the myths needed a little thunder now and then. But for tonight, the quiet is all you need. When the gods finally push their bowls aside and shuffle off to whatever dull duties await them, you decide to wander again. Your feet carry you past the longhouse and down toward a clearing where something, even slower, is happening. There stands Audumla, the primeval cow. You might expect a beast of such cosmic importance to look majestic, glowing with otherworldly light. Instead, she just looks like a cow. Large, calm, her hide flecked with mud, her eyes half-lidded as if she's been awake far too long. She's not battling monsters, not pulling chariots across the sky. She's licking a block of salty ice. And she's been doing it for centuries. Her tongue drags slowly across the frozen surface, over and over, in the same spot. The sound is faint but steady, like the rhythm of someone running a finger along glass. You can almost count the strokes. 1, 2, 3. And nothing changes. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Just a cow, licking ice, in a world that has nothing better to do right now. According to the old tales, Audumla's licking will eventually reveal the form of Buri, the ancestor of the gods. But you don't see any grand figure emerging tonight. Just little rivulets melting, dripping down into the grass below. The cow pauses now and then, chews thoughtfully, then resumes, as though the universe itself depends on this tedious, repetitive action. You sit on a rock nearby, watching. It feels strangely meditative, like watching someone polish the same corner of a table for hours. The cow doesn't seem bored. If anything, she seems content. Every lick a tiny victory against the endless ice. Scholars still argue whether this image was meant to symbolize persistence, nourishment, or just the way myth makers filled awkward silences in their storytelling. Whatever the case, it's hypnotic in its slowness. A fly buzzes lazily around Audumla's ear. She flicks it away with her tail and doesn't even pause in her work. Lick, lick, lick. Somewhere in the distance, water drips from thawing snow, joining her quiet rhythm. The sound blends into the hush of the world, a soft metronome for your drowsy thoughts. You think about how this act, so boring, so uneventful, is the foundation of an entire mythology. A cow, revealing creation by licking salt from ice. Not with fire, not with war, but with patience. It's the ultimate anticlimax, and yet, somehow, it feels right for a bedtime story. After a while, you notice a faint outline forming in the ice, just the suggestion of a shoulder, maybe a nose. Nothing fully formed, just enough to remind you that even in the dullest actions, time is doing its slow work. You yawn, not from boredom exactly, but from the soft rhythm of it all. The cow pauses again, sighs through her nostrils, and leans in once more. Lick, lick, lick. You almost wonder if she's as much a prisoner of this task as a creator. Perhaps she doesn't know she's shaping gods. Perhaps she's just a cow, following instinct, savoring salt in the endless stillness. The wind shifts. Pine needles rustle. A crow caws in the distance, then goes silent again. Nothing interrupts her. No giant storms in. No god rushes to thank her. Just the steady, patient work of tongue against ice, the kind of detail most storytellers would skip over, except here, you're forced to watch it stretch on. And in that stretch, you find yourself relaxing, matching your breath to the rhythm. Time blurs. Minutes or hours could have passed. The ice glistens faintly in the dim light, wet where her tongue has smoothed it down. The outline grows clearer, but still incomplete. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next century, something will finally step forth. Tonight, though, it remains half hidden, half born, waiting. You stand eventually, stretching, and the cow doesn't even look at you. She just keeps working, relentless in her dull persistence. There's something comforting in knowing she'll still be there, licking away, long after you've gone. You turn back toward the path, leaving her behind. The rhythm of her tongue against the ice follows you, soft, repetitive, endless. And you feel yourself sinking deeper into that same rhythm, as if the whole world is licking away at time, one slow stroke at a time. The sound of Odin's steady licking fades behind you as you wander toward a quieter rise in the land. There, upon a high platform that seems more like an old lookout tower than a throne, sits Odin. You'd expect him to be commanding, booming with authority, but tonight he just looks like a man who has been sitting for a very, very long time. This is Huldskjalf, his high seat, from which he can see across all the worlds. But he isn't using it to survey battles or spy on giants. He's just sitting, leaning a little too heavily on one elbow, his chin resting in his palm. His one eye gazes out across the horizon, not sharp or piercing, but unfocused, like he's lost in thought, or maybe half asleep. The wind tugs gently at his cloak, and the ravens, Hugin and Munin, perch quietly nearby. They don't circle the skies or whisper secrets into his ear. They're just perched, blinking slowly, as if even they can't be bothered to bring him news. One scratches its beak lazily against the wood. The other fluffs its feathers, settles down, and tucks its head under its wing. You climb a little closer and find that Odin doesn't react. Maybe he sees you, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's too used to watching to care who wanders nearby. His fingers drum idly against the arm of his seat, not in impatience but in the kind of boredom that has lasted centuries. From here, you can see a stretch of Midgard, and if you squint, maybe Jotunheim's icy peaks in the far distance. But nothing's happening in either place. No giant raids, no fiery clashes, no earth-shaking thunder. Just stillness. Villagers trudging through their fields. Smoke rising faintly from hearths. Wolves padding through snow, leaving trails that disappear almost instantly. It's the kind of sight that would bore most people after 5 minutes. Odin has been staring at it for what could be days. Scholars still argue whether Odin's use of Huldskjalf was meant as divine surveillance or symbolic wisdom, but watching him now, you realize it might have been neither. Maybe sometimes he just sat there because he had nothing better to do. Even gods, it seems, need somewhere to zone out. A crow, not one of his, flutters down and lands at Odin's feet. It pecks at something invisible in the dust. Odin shifts slightly, glances down, then looks back at the horizon. He doesn't even shoo it away. His whole demeanor says, "Let the world do what it wants, I'll be here, sitting." You settle yourself at the base of the platform, following his gaze, trying to see what he sees. The longer you stare, the more you realize how empty the view is. And yet, the emptiness has a pull. The kind of pull that makes your eyelids feel heavier, your breath slower. There's no rush in this endless watching. No climax. Just the still weight of time. At one point, Odin shifts again, as if he might finally speak. His lips part slightly. You lean forward. But all he does is sigh, rub his temple, and lean back again. The silence stretches. The ravens shuffle. Somewhere far below, a goat bleats. The wind continues its lazy hum. That's it. That's all. It's almost funny. This is the All-Father, the God who sacrificed an eye for wisdom, the God who searches endlessly for knowledge. And here he is, stuck in the same loop as anyone scrolling through the same view out a window, waiting for something, anything, to change. You glance back up at him and see that his eye is half closed now. Maybe he's drifting into a nap. Maybe he's still watching. It's impossible to tell. Either way, the stillness of his seat seeps into you. You can feel yourself mirroring him. Your own body slackening, your mind drifting, the horizon stretching endlessly forward without event. And in that, there's comfort. The God of wisdom, sitting and staring, doing nothing special. If even Odin can take hours just to zone out, then you're allowed to as well. The world doesn't end. No giants attack. No storms rise. Just Odin, sitting in his chair, the universe turning quietly beneath his gaze. You leave Odin behind in his chair, still staring out into the endless horizon, and follow a narrow path downhill. The air smells faintly sweet, a mix of honey and damp wood. Soon, you find the source, a massive barrel, propped up in a half-forgotten shed. The boards creak under its weight, and a sticky golden drip oozes slowly from one seam. This is no ordinary brew, it's the mead of Kvasir, endlessly replenishing, endlessly poured, endlessly, boring in its repetition. The shed itself isn't lively. There's no tavern atmosphere, no laughter, no shouts of joy. Just a few gods sitting on overturned crates, sipping their mead in silence. One scratches his beard thoughtfully, another stares into the wooden grain of the table as if answers might appear there. The only sound is the occasional glug as someone refills their cup from the barrel. The story behind this mead is legendary. Brewed from the blood of Kvasir, the wisest being, it was meant to inspire poetry, wisdom, art. And yet here it sits, in a drafty shed, fueling nothing more than slow, drowsy sipping. You half expect someone to burst into verse, but instead, you just hear another long, drawn-out yawn. A god dips his cup into the frothy surface, drinks, wipes his beard, and mutters, tastes the same as yesterday. Another nods. And the day before. There's no excitement in their voices, no spark of inspiration. Just the resigned knowledge that the barrel will never run dry, and therefore, will never be special again. 10/9, 3:01 p.m. ASC. You sit on a beam, watching the golden liquid drip into a mug. Plop, plop. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic. The way the mead clings to the wood, the way it catches in the firelight, it's mesmerizing, like staring at a candle flame that never burns down. Scholars still argue whether the myth of Kvasir's mead was a metaphor for knowledge that becomes diluted over time, or for art that grows dull when repeated endlessly. Sitting here, you see the truth in both. What began as a divine treasure has become just another drink. What was once fire has cooled into a background hum. One of the gods swirls his cup, watching the liquid spin. You know, he says after a long silence, I think it tastes a little stronger today. Everyone else just shrugs. No one bothers to argue. Even debate feels too much effort in this room. A spider lowers itself from the rafters, dangling above the barrel, and then climbs back up again. The gods watch it briefly, then go back to their cups. That spider was the most exciting thing that's happened here all week. You let your own thoughts drift, tracing the smell of honey through the air, letting it wrap around you like a blanket. The mead isn't yours to drink, but the atmosphere is contagious, slow, thick, heavy with repetition. You imagine the barrel will be here tomorrow, and the next day, and the next 1,000 years, untouched except for the same routine, dip, sip, sigh. Even Loki, who must have wandered in at some point, slouches at the edge of the table, idly tracing patterns in spilled mead with his finger. He could be scheming, planning some trick, but tonight he's too weighed down by the sheer dullness of it all. Even mischief has no fuel when the drink never changes, never surprises. The fire in the corner sputters, coughs up a few sparks, and then settles back down. The shadows sway across the barrels, long and soft. The hum of silence fills the room again, thicker than smoke. You lean against the wall, closing your eyes for a moment. The sound of the dripping meat and the slow breathing of half-asleep gods blend together into a lullaby you didn't expect. It's less a place of wisdom than of waiting. Waiting for something to happen that never does. And in that waiting, you feel yourself drifting too, like honey sliding slowly down the inside of the barrel, thick, heavy, inevitable. You slip out of the meat shed, the smell of honey still clinging faintly to your clothes, and wander toward the faint clatter of metal. It's not the sharp clash of battle, not the ring of heroic forging. It's just the dull clink of a merchant showing off his wares. Here stands Freyr, the god of fertility, crops, and sunshine. You might imagine him bathed in golden light, surrounded by fields. Instead, he's squinting at a stall set up by some dwarves, looking like a farmer trying to decide whether a tool is worth its price. The dwarves, usually makers of magical treasures, seem unusually patient tonight. They're not bragging about their craft, not weaving riddles, just standing there, arms folded, waiting for Freyr to make up his mind. On the table rests a sword. It's finely made, gleaming faintly, balanced just so. You know the stories. This sword is destined to be important, destined to leave Freyr without a weapon when Ragnarok comes. But right now, it's just another purchase. Freyr picks it up, weighs it in his hand, gives it a few half-hearted swings. He doesn't look thrilled. He doesn't look horrified. He just looks undecided. Feels a little heavy, he mutters. The dwarf shrugs. You'll get used to it. Freyr frowns, nods, sets it back down, then picks it up again. You watch the most uneventful bargaining in history unfold. Freyr scratches his chin. The dwarfs remain stone-faced. He asks the price. They tell him. He sighs, tries to haggle, fails miserably, then finally just says, "All right, fine." Coins change hands with no drama, no tricks, no explosions of magical light. Just the dull clink of metal in a pouch. He studies the blade again, admiring the way it catches the firelight. But there's no awe in his eyes, only mild satisfaction, like someone who just bought a slightly better plow. He straps it to his side, awkwardly adjusting the belt, and tests how it hangs. Too low. He shifts it. Too high. Another adjustment. Finally, he just shrugs and leaves it crooked. Scholars still argue whether Freyr's decision to give away this sword later was meant to symbolize sacrifice for love, or whether it was simply a reminder that even gods make questionable shopping choices. Watching him now, you'd believe the latter. It feels less like destiny and more like a man who made an impulse buy and will regret it later. The dwarfs pack up their stall with all the energy of shopkeepers closing after a long, uneventful day. One yawns. The other mutters something about needing more iron. The excitement level couldn't be lower if they were selling spoons. Freyr turns to leave, the new sword at his hip, but he doesn't strut or boast. He doesn't even smile. He just walks away slowly, already distracted by the thought of planting schedules or whether the sun will rise on time tomorrow. The sword hangs awkwardly, forgotten almost as soon as he bought it. You trail behind him for a while, watching him wander back toward his haul, the blade bouncing gently against his thigh. He scratches his beard, whistles faintly, and looks more like a farmer humming to himself than a warrior preparing for the end of the world. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes the most important choices don't feel important at all. Sometimes they're just another line in the endless list of things you did on an ordinary day. You let him drift out of sight, the clink of the sword fading into the night. The path ahead is quiet again, lined with pine trees and the faint chirp of crickets. Somewhere far away, the sound of the mead barrel's steady drip still echoes in your memory. And just like that, the world sinks back into its sleepy rhythm. The path curls downhill, and you follow it until you hear a low humming. It's not the hum of voices, nor the chant of warriors, it's the grinding, grumbling hum of giants going about their chores. You step into a broad valley where a stone farmhouse squats in the middle of the plain. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney, not in dramatic black coils but in thin, pale wisps that look like the sky itself is sighing. Inside, the giants live lives far less thrilling than their reputations suggest. You'd expect towering, terrifying beings hurling boulders and challenging gods to duels. Instead, you see one giant woman sitting on a stool, grinding flour with a stone mill that squeaks on every rotation. Another tends to goats, brushing their thick coats with slow, deliberate strokes. A third is chopping wood, though even that looks dull when the logs split with barely any resistance. The giants' voices carry softly across the field. They talk about the weather, about whether the last winter was harsher than the one before, about the crops not sprouting as quickly as they used to. It sounds less like an epic saga and more like a farmer's market gossip session. One giant leans on his axe and sighs. The gods will come for us someday, he mutters. Another shrugs. Let them. As long as they don't touch the grain. They chuckle quietly, though even laughter here feels half asleep. Scholars still argue whether these tales of giants were meant to reflect humanity's fear of the untamed natural world or whether they were simply exaggerated campfire stories. Watching them sweep their porches and fuss over livestock, you lean toward the latter. Fearsome beings reduced to a routine of chores. A goat sneezes. Everyone looks up. For a moment, you expect something dramatic. But no, it's just a sneeze. They go back to their tasks without comment. The meal that evening is as unremarkable as the chores. Bread baked from the freshly ground flour, goat's milk ladled into bowls, a little salted fish on the side. The giants sit around a heavy table, shoulders hunched, chewing slowly. The sound of mastication fills the hall like a strangely sleepy drumbeat. No songs, no toasts, no loud arguments, just the steady scrape of knives and the dull rhythm of chewing. You sit in a corner, unnoticed, breathing in the smell of warm bread and damp wool. The fire in the hearth pops quietly, tossing a spark into the air before dying down again. Shadows stretch across the stone walls, dancing lazily in the flickering light. At one point, a young giant asks, "Do you think the gods are watching us right now?" The elder across the table shrugs. If they are, they must be very bored. Everyone nods in agreement, then takes another slow bite of bread. Outside, the night deepens. The goats settle into the grass, the tools lean against the walls, and the valley grows still. Even the crickets seem reluctant to break the monotony. You wander back out beneath the stars, their cold glow scattered across the dark sky. The farmhouse looks small now, despite its giant occupants, just another quiet corner of a myth that isn't nearly as dramatic as the sagas make it sound. You can still hear the grind of the millstone faintly turning, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of this place. And as you move on, you realize that the giant's world isn't one of terror or chaos. It's one of patience, routine, and waiting. Waiting for the inevitable, but in the meantime, tending to goats, grinding flour, and chewing bread. It's not the stuff of legends. But it is, undeniably, the stuff of sleep. You wander past the Valley of Giants until the ground hardens beneath your feet. The air grows cooler, carrying the faint smell of stone dust. Ahead rises a dark cavern, and from within comes the metallic ring of hammers. At first you imagine sparks, fire, the clang of furious forging, but as you step inside, you realize the dwarves' workshop is quieter than you expected. The dwarves are there, of course, short, sturdy figures hunched over anvils, but there's no frenzy, no wild bursts of magic. Just slow, rhythmic taps. Clink, clink, clink. The kind of hammering that doesn't shout but murmurs. Each strike is careful, measured, like they're more concerned about keeping time than creating wonders. On the workbenches lie half-finished projects. A buckle, a hinge, a spoon. Yes, these are the same dwarves who forged Mjolnir, Odin's spear, Freyr's ship. Yet tonight, their task is decidedly less grand. A pot with a dent. A knife in need of sharpening. One dwarf sighs and mutters, "Not every day is a legendary day." Another nods without looking up. You watch a dwarf file the edge of a blade for what feels like an eternity. Back and forth, each rasp softer than the last. The sound becomes almost soothing, like waves on a shore. Sparks occasionally jump, but they die out quickly, fading before they touch the ground. Scholars still argue whether the myths of dwarves emphasize their role as creators of cosmic treasures, or whether those same myths overlook the centuries of uneventful tinkering in between. After all, even a divine blacksmith can't live on epics alone. Someone has to fix the hinges on the mead shed door. One dwarf pauses to stretch his back, joints popping audibly. "I'm telling you," he grumbles, "people only remember the big jobs. No one sings about the spoon I made last month." His companion just chuckles. "Maybe one day spoons will save the world." They laugh softly, and then, as though embarrassed by the energy of the moment, both go back to their steady hammering. The cavern itself is dim, lit only by a few oil lamps. Shadows huddle in the corners, and the air is heavy with the scent of iron and ash. A single stream of water trickles down the far wall, echoing faintly as it drips into a stone basin. The sound mixes with the hammering in a kind of accidental harmony. You sit on a rock, letting the rhythm lull you. The workshop feels timeless, as though it has always been like this and always will be. Creation here isn't a burst of brilliance, it's a long, slow exhale. You picture centuries of dwarves repeating the same motions, forging countless tools no one will ever tell stories about. At one point, a younger dwarf shuffles over with a bundle of raw ore. "Should we start something new?" he asks. The elder shakes his head. "Not tonight. Tonight we sharpen, we mend, we wait." And so they do. You lean back against the cavern wall, the cool stone pressing into your shoulders. The faint ringing of metal drifts through the air, fading in and out like a lullaby. It isn't the soundtrack of heroes, it's the quiet persistence of people who keep the world running, unnoticed. When you finally step back out of the cavern, the night sky greets you again. The stars shimmer like specks of metal dust scattered across velvet. Behind you, the faint clink, clink continues, steady as a heartbeat, following you into the dark. You keep walking under the star-filled sky until you hear faint voices ahead. Not the booming chants of warriors, not the shrill cries of Valkyries, just low, muttering tones, almost like a debate that no one really wants to win. At the edge of a quiet field, you come across a group of gods sitting in a circle. The grass around them is trampled flat, not from battle but from the weight of endless meetings. They aren't fighting giants, they aren't forging destinies, they're just talking. Or more accurately, quibbling. One scratches his head. "Do we need another feast this month?" Another sighs. "We just had one." A third mutters, "But the harvest is coming. It would look bad if we didn't." And so it goes, round and round in circles, like an immortal committee trapped in eternal bureaucracy. Occasionally, someone raises a hand dramatically, but it only results in another half-hearted suggestion. There are no passionate speeches here, no grand decisions. Just weary voices looping endlessly, like waves eroding a shoreline. You sit nearby, listening as they debate whether the tables in Valhalla should be moved closer to the fire, or whether the benches should be sanded smoother. One god insists the benches are fine. Another swears they squeak. The group pauses to consider this revelation, only to fall into silence, staring blankly into the grass. Scholars still argue whether these myths of divine councils were symbolic of cosmic order, or whether they were simply echoes of real-world assemblies where leaders argued about the dullest details of governance. Either way, it's clear, even gods aren't free from meetings that should have been letters. At one point, someone finally sighs and says, "Shall we adjourn?" But another quickly replies, "We didn't actually decide anything." So the circle resumes, voices dragging on. A breeze rustles through the grass, and even the wind sounds like it's tired of waiting. The moon drifts slowly across the sky, watching this eternal non-debate with detached amusement. The gods themselves seem half asleep. Their words growing softer, slower, as though the weight of decision-making is heavier than Thor's hammer. You rest your chin on your hand, eyes half closed, lulled by the steady drone. There's something strangely comforting about it, the way their words blur into a single hum, like bees in a faraway hive. You don't need to follow the details. You just let the rhythm wash over you. Eventually, the voices fade into long stretches of silence, punctuated only by the occasional cough or the shuffle of someone adjusting their seat. The council continues, but you've stopped listening. You're already slipping into the drowsy undertow of their eternal meeting. You leave the circle of bickering gods behind, and the night folds back into silence. The path bends toward the sound of hooves, not thundering warhorses, but the slow, deliberate clop of animals pulling carts. Soon, you arrive at a dusty trail where farmers, mortals this time, guide their wagons loaded with grain, fish, and salted meat. For all the sagas of warriors and raids, most Norse lives looked like this: steady, repetitive, quietly exhausting. A man in a rough wool tunic trudges beside his oxen, muttering to himself about the mud on the road. A woman balances baskets of turnips, adjusting the straps digging into her shoulders. Behind them, a child yawns loudly, half asleep on top of a sack of hay. The gods may have their counsels and weapons, but here the rhythm of daily life is slower, more predictable. No monsters rise from the hills tonight, no omens flare across the sky. Just the squeak of wheels, the clink of tools, the crunch of boots on gravel. One wagon creaks to a stop. The wheel is loose again. The farmer kneels, fiddling with the peg, grumbles about how dwarves never build anything to last. His wife rolls her eyes, clearly having heard this complaint every day for the last decade. You sit on a rock, watching the procession creep forward inch by inch. Nobody's in a hurry. They know the market will be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. These wagons aren't racing to glory, they're rolling toward routine. Scholars still argue whether the Norse myths left these quieter lives out because they weren't considered worth recording, or whether the stories of gods were just ways to give cosmic meaning to the same repetitive work humans did daily. Looking at the farmers, you'd believe the latter. Their chores are their sagas, even if no skald ever bothered to sing them. One farmer stops to rest, leaning against his cart. He pulls out a hunk of bread, chews slowly, then offers a piece to his ox as if to say, "We're both in this together." The ox chews with equal patience, eyes half closed. The moonlight glints off the iron rims of the wheels, catching every turn, every bump. The sound grows hypnotic. Wheel squeak, hoof clop, wheel squeak, hoof clop. Before long, you find yourself rocking slightly, as though you too are being carried along in one of those creaking carts. The trail winds onward, and the wagons vanish into the dark. You're left with the lingering sound of tired voices and the faint smell of hay, already blending into the background hum of the night. It wasn't a tale of heroism. But in its own way, it's the truest Viking legend. Endless work, endless waiting, endless days bleeding into one another. The trail of farmers fades behind you, and soon the air grows sharper, tinged with the scent of salt. You follow the pull of waves until you reach the edge of the sea. The shoreline stretches wide and empty, the water black beneath the moon. At first, you brace for tales of great voyages, storms, or raids. Instead, you find a row of fishermen sitting idly on their boats, ropes slack, nets already stowed. They've returned from the day's work, and there's nothing dramatic about it. No treasure, no monstrous serpents thrashing against the hull, no gods intervening in the tide. Just baskets of fish, already smelling faintly sour, and men too tired to care. One fisherman slumps against the mast, his beard crusted with salt, muttering about how the catch was lighter than last week. Another pokes at a hole in the net, sighs, and decides it can wait until morning. A third sprawls across the deck, staring at the stars as if they might blink first. The sea itself is calm, lapping gently against the hulls with no sense of urgency. It almost seems bored, as though even the waves can't muster the energy to crash. The rhythm is steady, 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 like a cradle rocking. Scholars still argue whether the Norse saw the sea as a fearsome frontier or as a familiar neighbor. Both appear in the myths. Terrifying Midgard serpents, yes, but also countless uneventful fishing trips that never made it into legend. And perhaps those were the more common truth. The endless waiting, the slow rocking, the dull ache in the shoulders after hours of rowing. One man lifts a fish from the basket, stares at it as though it might start a conversation, then drops it back with a wet thud. Another yawns so wide you half expect his jaw to creak like the ship's planks. The quiet stretches on, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish still flopping weakly in a bucket. You sit at the edge of the dock, dipping your fingers into the cool water. The sea accepts your touch without reaction, ripples spreading outward only to vanish again into stillness. The boats bob gently, ropes creaking in rhythm with the tide. Farther out, a faint glow marks another boat returning home, but it moves so slowly it feels like you could nap and still wake before it reaches shore. Time here doesn't rush, it drifts. One fisherman finally breaks the silence. Tomorrow will be the same. The others grunt their agreement. And with that, they close their eyes, letting the boats rock them toward sleep. The sea sighs. The nets droop. The night holds steady. Nothing changes, and that is exactly what makes it so soothing. From the quiet sea, you wander inland again, your steps crunching softly over pine needles. The forest deepens, tall trees swaying gently overhead, their branches creaking like old floorboards. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faintest scratching sound, soft, patient, steady. You follow it to a clearing where an old Norn sits at the base of Yggdrasil's sprawling roots. You'd expect grandeur. The fates weaving the destinies of gods and men, threads glowing with magic, the air charged with significance. Instead, you find a woman with gray hair tucked messily under a scarf, muttering to herself as she untangles a hopeless knot. The loom before her doesn't gleam with gold or silver. It's just wood, worn smooth by centuries of use. The threads are dull, muted shades, browns, grays, the occasional faded blue. She sighs as another snarl refuses to loosen, and for a long time, she just pulls at it, patiently, without drama. You watch her lift one strand, weave it over another, then tug the shuttle through. The pattern is slow, repetitive, almost monotonous. And yet, it carries weight, the quiet burden of inevitability. Every thread is a life, every not a delay, every weave a choice that no one notices until much later. Scholars still argue whether the Norns symbolized unshakable destiny or simply the randomness of human existence dressed up in metaphor. Looking at this one, you'd guess neither. She doesn't look like someone dictating cosmic law. She looks like someone doing endless chores, too stubborn to quit. Her lips move softly as she counts. One thread, another, then another. It's not mystical incantation. It's more like a bored tailor keeping track of stitches. Occasionally she pauses to scratch her nose, adjust her scarf, or squint at the loom in frustration. A squirrel darts across the root above her, scattering bark. She doesn't look up. The world can wait. The weaving must continue. You sit cross-legged, letting the soft rustle of thread soothe you. Over, under, tug. Over, under, tug. The rhythm seeps into your mind until it feels like your own heartbeat is following along. At one point, she sighs and leans back. This cloth will never end, she mutters, half to herself, half to the night air. Then she picks up the shuttle again, resigned. Over, under, tug. The loom creaks, the branches sway, the forest hums with the slow breath of time itself. Nothing grand, nothing flashy. Just endless weaving in the shadows of eternity. And as you watch, your eyes grow heavy. The threads blur into lines of light, stretching across your vision until you can't tell whether you're seeing the fabric of fate, or just the haze of sleep pulling gently at your thoughts. You leave the Norn behind, her loom still creaking in steady rhythm, and follow a winding trail that leads into the faint glow of torchlight. You expect another hall full of warriors, perhaps a feast, maybe a duel. Instead, you stumble upon the stables of Asgard. The smell of hay and leather fills the air. Horses shift in their stalls, hoofs clopping softly against wood, tails flicking lazily at flies. Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged steed, stands among them, not galloping across worlds, not blazing through the sky, just chewing hay, his ears twitching occasionally. The stable hands, gods or servants, move at an unhurried pace. One brushes a mare's coat, long strokes that raise tiny clouds of dust. Another refills a trough, the water sloshing quietly. A third yawns, leaning against a pitchfork, clearly wishing for bed. You stand there a moment, taking in the calm routine. The air is heavy with warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones. The only sounds are the steady munch of horses, the drip of water, the occasional snort or shuffle. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic, just animals being tended, night after night. Scholars still argue whether Sleipnir's place in myth was purely symbolic, speed, otherworldly travel, Odin's uncanny power, or whether his inclusion also reminded listeners of the importance of humble work like grooming, feeding, and stable keeping. Watching him here, you'd say the latter feels truer. Even an eight-legged marvel needs hay and water. One of the stable hands pats Sleipnir's side, muttering, "You eat twice as much as any other, you know." Sleipnir flicks an ear, unbothered. The god sighs, fetches another armful of hay, and the cycle repeats. You lean against the wooden beams, watching torchlight dance across the horses' backs. Their muscles ripple in slow waves beneath their skin, but there's no urgency in them. The night is theirs to rest, to chew, to breathe. Even the air inside the stable feels drowsy, heavy with the weight of routine. The sounds, the rustle of hay, the soft swish of tails, the muffled clop of hooves, meld into a rhythm not unlike a lullaby. A horse exhales, long and deep, steam curling into the cool night. It feels like the whole stable exhales with it. You follow suit, your own breath slowing to match. No battles rage here, no gods shout, no stories crash forward with urgency. Just the steady, soothing beat of everyday care, tucked into the quiet corners of Asgard. The stable's warmth lingers on your skin as you step back into the night. The air outside feels cooler, cleaner, carrying the faint crackle of fire. You follow the glow and discover a small ring of flames in the distance. Not a great bonfire of celebration, but a modest hearth where a group of shield maidens sit. You've heard the tales of Valkyries swooping down in storms, claiming the fallen with fierce beauty. But here, they're just tending a quiet campfire, their armor laid aside, their spears stacked neatly against a tree. They look less like divine warriors and more like travelers waiting for morning. One pokes the fire with a stick, nudging the embers into a brighter glow. Another stirs a pot hanging over the flames, the smell of thin stew drifting through the night. The third yawns, stretching her arms until her shoulders pop, before settling back against a log with a sigh. Their conversation is slow, unhurried. They speak of mundane things. Whether the stew needs more salt, whose turn it is to fetch water, which cloak dried fastest after last night's rain. The kind of chatter you'd expect from anyone on a long, tiring journey. Scholars still argue whether the Valkyries were meant as terrifying figures of fate or simply as personifications of battle's practical aftermath. Watching them sip stew and complain about wet boots, you'd say both ideas miss the point. They seem more like weary coworkers killing time between shifts. The fire crackles lazily, tossing up sparks that vanish almost instantly. The Valkyries don't sing, don't chant, don't argue. They just sit, eat, and rest. Their armor gleams faintly in the firelight, but tonight it's only decoration, not destiny. One eventually mutters, "Tomorrow will be long again." The others nod, too tired to respond aloud. The pot is scraped clean, the bowls set aside. The crackle of the fire takes over, filling the silence with its soft, steady rhythm. You sit nearby, soaking in the warmth. The flames shift colors, orange, red, the occasional flicker of blue, and the shadows stretch long across the grass. The air feels heavy, as if urging you to lean back, close your eyes, and let the monotony of the moment carry you further into drowsiness. The Valkyries say nothing more. They just watch the fire, lids drooping, letting the night cradle them in silence. When the fire dwindles to glowing embers, you wander again, guided by the faint sound of trickling water. The path dips into a grove where a narrow stream cuts through the roots of ancient trees. The water sparkles faintly, reflecting what little moonlight filters through the branches. You kneel beside it, cupping your hands to feel the cool flow. It's clean, steady, and, most surprisingly, utterly ordinary. This isn't a river of blood, not a magical spring of wisdom, not even a cursed pool guarded by serpents. Just a stream that winds through Asgard's soil, carrying the same quiet rhythm it always has. A few figures sit along the bank, their cloaks drawn around them. Not warriors, not gods in gleaming attire, but attendants, those who fetch the water each morning, who scrub armor, who mop the mead hall floors. They fill their buckets slowly, chatting about nothing in particular. How the weather turned colder, how one of the goats tried to bite them, how tired they are of carrying water back and forth. You realize how rarely the myths mention people like these. All the songs and sagas leap to heroes and gods, but never to the ones cleaning up after the feast, or trudging to the stream so Odin doesn't run out of clean water. Yet here they are, their lives a cycle of small tasks that never end, a rhythm more eternal than any clash of swords. Scholars still argue whether Norse mythology erased the voices of ordinary folk or preserved them in whispers under the guise of servants and helpers. Sitting by this stream, you'd say those whispers are louder than most would expect. The water babbles over stones, slipping past mossy banks, never rushing, never stalling. You listen closely, and it becomes like background music, soft, repetitive, hypnotic. One of the attendants hums tunelessly as they dip another bucket, and the sound blends with the stream until you can't tell them apart. Nothing here demands your attention. No monster waits in the dark. No hidden weapon gleams beneath the water's surface. Just buckets being filled, poured, and filled again, a process so dull it somehow becomes comforting. The stream doesn't care whether gods or men drink from it. It flows just the same, as it always has, as it always will. And in that endless repetition, you feel your own thoughts slow to match its current, carried gently forward, deeper into the night. You leave the stream behind, its quiet babble still echoing in your ears, and drift toward the faint sound of laughter. Not raucous laughter, not the kind that rattles a hall with drunken joy, but small, tired chuckles, the kind that slip out when someone's too worn out to hold them in. You find a group of farmers seated around a low wooden table, their hands rough and calloused, their clothes plain. No golden meat horns here, no elaborate feasts. Just bowls of porridge cooling in the evening air, and mugs of something closer to watered-down ale than the godly brews sung of in sagas. They speak of harvests, of broken tools, of the goat that keeps wandering into the neighbor's yard. Someone groans about how their thatch roof leaks whenever it rains, and another replies, "At least your roof hasn't collapsed entirely." The group laughs softly, shaking their heads, not in triumph, but in shared exhaustion. You notice their rhythm: eat, laugh, sigh, sip, repeated again and again. It's a cycle older than myths themselves, a pattern that threads through every culture, every household, every age. Scholars still argue whether the myths of gods were ever meant for people like this, or whether they were stories told by the elite, polished in longhouses far removed from muddy fields. Yet it's here, among the ordinary folk, that those stories found their roots. Because between complaints about goats and leaky roofs, someone still murmurs a fragment of Odin's wisdom, or Thor's clumsy courage, and the group nods, comforted. A child yawns and lays their head on their mother's lap. The firelight catches the curve of their cheek, soft and peaceful, untouched by any need to plow or mend. The adults keep talking, their words looping lazily, filling the night with a steady drone. The porridge bowls empty slowly. Someone stretches, mutters about early chores, and the others nod in agreement. Yet no one rises. They linger, savoring the sameness of the moment, the dull but dependable ritual of food, talk, and rest. The air here feels thick with contentment. Nothing shines, nothing shouts, nothing demands to be remembered. It's the kind of night that slips by unnoticed, unless you're here, watching. And then you realize, unnoticed nights like these are the threads that hold the whole tapestry together. The laughter fades to silence, the mugs rest empty, and the fire burns low. The farmers sit in the glow, their eyes half closed, their shoulders relaxed. You sit with them, lulled by their tired comfort, and feel yourself sinking into the same quiet rhythm. You leave the farmers to their low fire and quiet laughter, following a path that seems to wind endlessly through the twilight. The night grows softer now, shadows lengthening, until you reach a clearing where a solitary figure sits on a smooth stone. It's Bragi, the skald of the gods, keeper of poetry and song. You expect him to be reciting grand verses, spinning sagas to stir hearts and inspire warriors. But he isn't. His harp rests idly across his lap, one string slightly out of tune. His eyes droop half shut, and every so often he plucks a single note, lets it fade, then sighs. The sound is faint, barely more than a whisper. Pluck. Pause. Pluck. No rhythm, no melody, just a string vibrating and dying in the night air. Bragi mutters a half line of verse, something about meter memory, then forgets the rest, trailing off. He scratches his beard, yawns, and starts again, only to stop midway through. It feels almost sacrilegious. Here's the god of poetry, dozing in the middle of his own unfinished stanzas. Yet there's something soothing about it. The repetition, the failed attempts, the silence between notes. It all falls into the same sleepy cadence as the farmers talk, the streams babble, the Valkyries' campfire. Scholars still argue whether Bragi was a historical poet later deified, or always a godly figure created to embody art itself. But in this moment, he seems like neither. He's just a tired old man fumbling with words at the end of a long day. And somehow, that makes him more comforting than all the sagas combined. The harp gives another hollow note, slightly twangy this time. Bragi chuckles softly at his own mistake, shrugs, and lets it be. The silence stretches longer between plucks, until the sound becomes less music and more like punctuation, markers in the dark that remind you time is still passing, even if nothing changes. A breeze drifts through the clearing, carrying the smell of moss and faint smoke from distant fires. Bragi leans back on his stone, finally laying the harp aside, and closes his eyes. Tomorrow, he murmurs, almost inaudible, tomorrow the words will come. But tonight, the unfinished verse is enough. The broken melody is enough. The pause is enough. You sit nearby, letting the quiet half-songs hang around you like a blanket. The night has no urgency left. Only fragments, only stillness, only the gentle surrender of sound fading into silence. The clearing fades behind you, Bragi's half-notes still echoing faintly, like ripples in water. You walk deeper into the night until you reach a quiet ridge. From here, you can see all of Asgard spread out below, its halls dim, its fires low, its noise stilled. The world of gods looks less like a place of legend now, and more like a village ready for sleep. At the ridge's edge, you find an old man sitting cross-legged, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders. Not Odin in his grandeur, not some trickster scheming, but just a figure keeping watch over the night. His single eye glimmers faintly in the starlight. He notices you, but doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His presence is quiet, steady, unremarkable. He looks less like a god of war and wisdom, and more like someone making sure the fires don't burn out, the goats don't stray too far, the dawn doesn't forget to arrive. The silence here is heavy, but not oppressive. It's the silence of the world winding down, of every voice softening, of every story reaching its last page. Even Odin, you realize, has nights where he simply sits and waits, doing nothing more than listening to the wind pass through the grass. Scholars still argue whether Odin was truly all-seeing, or whether his myths only gave him the illusion of endless knowledge. But tonight, he looks like a man who knows enough, that life isn't in the battles or the riddles, but in the pauses between them. The stars above wheel slowly, like sparks drifting from some enormous unseen fire. The ridge grows cooler, the grass damp with dew. Odin closes his eye and exhales, and in that moment, the entire world seems to breathe with him. Nothing stirs now. No hoofbeats, no laughter, no harp strings. Just the hush of night wrapping Asgard, and you within it. You lie back in the grass, staring at the stars until they blur. Your thoughts slow, your body heavy, and the endless cycle of Norse tales, gods, warriors, farmers, streams, fires, fades into one long, steady rhythm. A rhythm, meant not to thrill, but to soothe. To lull you past wakefulness. To leave you exactly where you are now, quiet, drowsy, almost gone. And so, the night drifts to its gentlest close. The last echoes of voices, of harp strings, of laughter and hoofbeats, all fade into a soft hum that seems to belong not to any one figure, but to the world itself. You're left with only stillness now, a calm expanse of quiet where nothing more needs to happen. The myths you've walked through tonight weren't the battles, weren't the storms, weren't the grand feasts carved into saga. They were the in-betweens, the pauses, the dull chores, the small comforts. And in those quieter corners, you found something steadier than glory. You found rest. The Norn at her loom, weaving threads that stretch endlessly. The Valkyries, yawning by their campfire. The farmers sharing porridge and complaints. The stream that babbles without beginning or end. Each one, in its own way, teaching the same truth. That life is not only fire and thunder, but also the steady beat of ordinary moments. So, as you lie here at the edge of Asgard, the grass cool beneath you, the stars wheeling slowly overhead, you feel that same rhythm settle into your chest. Each breath a thread, each heartbeat a note, each blink of an eye a tiny story that belongs only to you. Let the day behind you dissolve into the quiet. Let the stories fade into whispers. Let the hum of the world become the backdrop of your dreams. You are safe here, wrapped in the same stillness that even gods surrender to when the night grows deep. And as sleep gathers at the edges, pulling you gently into its embrace, remember, the myths will wait. The stories will keep. But for now, only rest matters. End of script. Sweet dreams. Like and share this video with other and subscribe our YouTube channel for walking more best videos and support us.